All right, I'm back with Brian Mashad, Greg Levitz, and tonight we're going to be talking about when to consult or when to talk to a professional, whether it be an instructor or a dive shop professional. A couple things that we've run into over the years, having people try to do things on their own or try to buy things without really knowing what they're trying to accomplish. So, when do you talk to a professional? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we've all got some history on seeing divers, not necessarily just students, as Greg and I were talking about, not necessarily just students, but divers at a dive site. And they really, you could tell by looking at them, they didn't talk to anyone before doing what they were trying to do. So, with that being said, I figured we get into it. Now, most recently, I came across someone that posted to a forum that I belong to about rigging up a side mount setup. So he was trying to try out or trying to do something with side mount, but he didn't want to go through an official class. Can be dangerous in the first place. So to try a completely different configuration without getting any kind of formal instruction can be pretty dangerous, even if you're in shallow water just playing with it. So you want to have someone there to guide you through the setup, guide you through emergency procedures if something goes wrong with that new configuration, whether it be side mount, a single tank, doubles on your back, a rebreather, what have you. If you're experimenting with new gear, you can always rent the new gear, get in the pool or get in shallow open water with a shop with an instructor and go through the basics. And you can try it out and figure out if you like it or not, right? So, Brian, do you have just one? Let's start with one. Do you have anything that you've ever seen someone that should have consulted a professional prior to doing what they were doing?
The most common thing that I run across is when we're having an open water class, first night, registration, orientation, that kind of stuff. Someone shows up with a bag of gear that they put together themselves from various sources. Could be eBay, Amazon. They maybe went into Walmart in their pool section to get a mask and snorkel. And then they show up and they're like, all right, I've got my stuff. I want to learn how to dive. And you look at what they have, and maybe the mask fits, but it may not be tempered glass. Or it's not, a real silicone mask. It's a lot of plastic. It's might do okay for a dive or two, but it's going to start giving them issues pretty quickly. You can tell it's not that a good grade of equipment. They wanted to try to save money so they could afford the class, but here they are with stuff that they've purchased that in the one I love is so just came to mind, brings a smile to me every time I think of it. We we had a guy come into class all excited. He had found a dry suit online that fit him, and it belonged to a well-known diver. It belonged to his daughter. She had it custom made for her. It had her name stenciled in it, and he was all excited that he got this dry suit that fits him. It was a custom fit suit for a girl.
Do I know this well-known diver?
I believe so.
Oh boy. Okay.
And he ended up he taught some of Bert's stuff, so we can talk off camera later about it. But this suit was so skin tight, you couldn't put underwear under it. This dry, yeah, you fit into the dry suit. You literally got it on, but it was painted on. And we tried telling him this isn't going to work. And he went out, he tried it, came back and said, hey, can I trade this in and buy a dry suit? Because it provided zero thermal protection for him.
Yeah.
But I laugh every time we think about that. Somebody went out and bought something online without having any clue what they were doing. While yes, the measurements quote unquote fit him, it was a painted on suit. I mean, it was tighter than wetsuits. And as we all know, that's not how a dry suit works.
So just to interject there for a quick second, because I've bought used things from people online. I actually got my backup dry suit from someone online. So there are some good deals, and there's some money to be saved because I got a $2,500 dry suit for $600. But once again, Brian, you pointed out the fact he didn't know what he was doing or what he was looking for or what he was trying to accomplish, and he obviously didn't try it or dive with it prior to the purchase. So
Nope.
Once again, especially in that situation, as far as a dry suit, that really kind of has to fit you and fit your undergarment together. I'm not going to go into the details of how to fit a dry suit, but absolutely perfect example on when you should have consulted a professional and gotten measured. When I bought my first dry suit, it was a custom fit dry suit, but I also got fitted for the biggest or heaviest thermal that I would ever wear. So I could always adjust my thermal protection up or down depending on where I was diving.
Yep.
So Greg, what do you got for a story?
I have one quick one.
Okay.
I was teaching an open water class at the YMCA in Hartford. And the shop that I was working for at the time used to allow people who wanted to try things out, used to say, hey, just no problem. Go to the pool. There'll be a dive master there. They can work with you. So this guy shows up, and you know him. You know him very well. This guy shows up with a 7-foot hose. Puts it around his neck.
I know where this is going.
Put it around his neck twice and into his mouth.
Oh my gosh.
Please tell me the tank didn't fall out the back after that.
It was the funniest thing to see. I've never seen anything like that. That was, to me, it was as simple as, have you had any instruction with a 7-footer? Pretty simple.
Now, so he showed up at the pool like this. I'm hoping someone stopped him.
Eventually, after the laughter, it was very comical. I will give you a hint. Painted rocks.
Oh.
So
yeah, enough said. I don't even have to go any further there.
All right, now, 15 years ago, before side mount actually became something, this is a story about me.
Yep.
I really wanted to try side mount. I was like so excited. I thought it was the coolest looking thing. Thought it was going to be really fun. I didn't have to carry the 2 tanks on my back. I can carry the 2 tanks separately. I can do whatever. Bring them down to the water, put them in the water, then hook them up. I thought that was pretty good, especially on one of the dive sites. It's just such a long walk with a set of doubles. To me, it made somewhat sense. Hooked everything up, read the book, bought the book, watched the videos, the whole thing. There were no side mount instructors anywhere in the United States at the time. You had to go to Mexico. if you wanted to actually learn. But I thought I'll give it a try. I had everything, I literally down to the size hose, the tank bands that were smaller, the cam bands that were small, everything right down to what I thought was appropriate. Okay, so maybe I got the gear pretty close to being right, pretty close. Get in the water with them. I get in the water and go head first. I was so embarrassed. Luckily, I was by myself. Luckily, I was so embarrassed. I literally I said to myself, "What am I doing? I really need someone who knows exactly how to teach this, because I cannot teach myself this. There is no way." And it was pretty funny to watch. And luckily nobody was there, but it was just kind of very comical. That to me is a perfect example of thinking that, what do I need a pro for? Why do I need to travel to Mexico? This might even be more than, this probably, it's probably 15 years ago. So,
okay. So I also have a story, and it happens to be about myself. Because as both of you know, I started my instructor, the road to my instructor, at the same time as I started technical diving. So I actually skipped the intro to tech class, which I learned the hard way. But surprisingly, the shop that I went to for technical diving just put me directly into my advanced nitrox and deco procedures. So let's rewind a little bit. I bought doubles, I bought my manifold, I bought my hoses, I got my BC, I got everything I needed, everything they had on their list. Okay. I put everything together. Okay. I got in the water and I didn't get hurt, and I guess I didn't face plant, but it took me probably 2 months of diving that gear to even adjust my gear. So in my case, if I had gone through an intro to tech course, I would have had an instructor there to help me adjust my gear, trim myself out, and get myself going. So with that being said, fast forward to now, I do have a student that came to me for Tech 1, and he already went through Intro to Tech, but we have to redo his Intro to Tech because he's not ready for anything more advanced. But so
I have one more story then.
My story about me.
I hold a class on running reels, running line, and it was expected that everybody would show up with their own reel.
I know where this was going.
I don't know if he completely blanked out about. I was pretty specific on what you need to have, the whole thing. This guy shows up with a Home Depot homemade spool with kite line.
Okay.
Attached to his surf marker boy. And so I said to him, that's not going to work. Because why? It's 80-pound kite line test. That'll be perfect. Okay. So I knew it was going to be a mess on him. So we were in about 20 feet. I'm like, let me just prove it out. So the Home Depot spool that he bought, notches in it. And as soon as he blew up a little bit of air, it went up, it caught. The other thing is he put his thumb right through it.
Oh.
The edge. And all I could think of is, obviously he didn't pay close enough attention
Yep.
to what was needed.
Well, and that's absolutely, that's another problem we could run into, but at least we covered our bases. If you
Right.
get a student that's just not paying attention to you and how you're instructing them, you'll know it by the time they have to perform for their checkout. But I mean, you can't get water from a stone.
I know. It's just
Yeah.
amazing. You know what? The other thing is, it's when we have people show up for dives and they end up configuring their gear. Prime example, their regulator. It's like when they configure it based on something that just doesn't make any sense, and so you end up with,
Well, and that's why we have a gear night. One of our first nights or one of our
Right.
first days, we have
Yep.
a gear night. Let me see your kit. Let me go over your rig, and we'll go over and we'll talk about everything you have. And
always do that. But
how
do you ever have that, Todd? Do you ever have the problem though when somebody thinks they know more about setting up gear, or they listen, but then they show up reverting back to what they did? And prime example, like when students say, well, the dive shop told me to buy the thingamabig jig thing that has the coil up thing, and because the dive shop said, and it's a balance between when you're a private instructor and you're not working for a shop. It's really tough when you're working for a shop and you just can't. It seems like
you can't badmouth anything that the shop sold the student.
Right. But
yeah,
they should have consulted. They should have consulted first. That's the problem.
I know what you're getting at, but unfortunately, you also work for a shop that they weren't really divers.
True.
So they weren't knowledgeable in the stuff that they were selling the student.
Right.
So someone should have consulted an instructor at that point.
Yeah.
Brian has a great situation because he works for a diver that happens to own a shop. It's not
Right.
It's not a shop owner that happens to dive. He works for a diver that
Right.
owns the shop. There's a difference.
Yeah.
But absolutely. I mean, how many different gags or gimmicks do people buy? Because it sounds like a really good idea up front, but they don't really play it through, and they don't really think about it, and they don't really see it in action prior to buying it.
Right.
Which is, I guess, a great reason that little things like reels and slates and stuff like that, I have here. Try it. This is what I suggest. If you like it, you buy it. If you don't,
Right.
give it back to me, and I'll sell it to someone else, or I'll use it for another student, or whatever.
That makes sense.
So Brian, we went over what else you got? You have any others?
Well, yeah. Seeing as how we're throwing ourselves under the bus.
Well, and there's a really good reason I wanted to do that. No one's perfect.
No,
and we all started somewhere.
Yeah.
And we've all made the mistakes, and we all, hindsight is 20/20 and yada yada yada. I did stupid things. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on gear that I don't use anymore. I'm giving it away just because I don't use it.
Yeah. First time I ever used a pony bottle. I had.
Good boy.
I got to try the Pony Tamer, that quick release thing.
Yep.
And
How many things did that get snagged on?
that wasn't the issue.
Oh, okay.
The issue, well, as you know, a 7-foot hose doesn't fit me.
Yep. He is one of the only guys I know. He can't wear a 7-foot hose the normal way.
Can't do it.
He's too tall, and he's a big guy. He's not fat. He's big. So the combination of the two.
I got a big old barrel chest. So the 7-foot hose comes straight out the side, wraps around and in my mouth. That's it. It has just enough to make it around me and get to my mouth.
Does it go under your armpit?
Under his arm.
Yeah, I have to pull it up high under my armpit. If I don't, I'm like this. I'm like, okay, this isn't right, and I gotta to get it in place.
So
Yeah.
Maybe you need an 8-footer then.
I think I actually have an 8-foot is what I've got right now. But there's no bringing it down around the light canister. That's not happening. But anyway.
So obviously he's never going to do a class for a certain agency because they only dive one way.
That's funny.
Right, tell us about the pony bottle thing, because I have a very similar one.
So the like the issue with the 7-foot hose, I got the pony bottle set up with just a regular regulator on it. I'm not thinking that I'm going to be using it for me, because I have actually a student that I'm worried about. We had brought the pony tamer into the shop. We hadn't really started playing with it yet. It was like, well, here, I'm like, you know what, let me try it. So the night before we head out on this dive, I grab the bottle, the thing, and I get it all set up. And I try to position it where I'm like, well, this should work. Well, we go out on the dive, and I'm like, well, let me grab this regulator. Let me just see if this will work. So I grab the reg, and I go, it stopped here. I couldn't actually get it to my mouth.
Yeah.
It was about 2 inches too short.
Right.
There was nothing I could do to get my mouth on that regulator. There was no position I could get in to be able to use that regulator. Fortunately, I didn't need it. I'm like, let me just try it. And when we got back on the boat, someone on the boat made the comment. They're like, you know, I noticed, because they have a lot of experience with it. Like, I was going to ask you about that. I'm like, yeah, I set it up last night. It doesn't work. So before we went back for the next dive, I actually took everything off. I'm like, forget it. I'm not even going to, you know, but yeah, that's where, you know, if before we had gotten in the water, even on the boat, hey, does this look right? No, it's not. It's not right.
Right.
And here's why. You know, that you can't use a standard hose. You need the longer hose to make whatever. None of the things that we thought of before trying it. But yeah, when it was like, I just couldn't do it. So you got one?
Highland Band. Really nice quality band. At the time, our instructor told us that this is what you need. You got to have this one. It's the only one. So it basically fit an aluminum 80 and a 19. And then what you did is you put on your aluminum 80 and you slide your 19 down, and you just take your thing and you take a big Allen wrench and tighten it in, and it's solid as a rock. The problem is it was so uncomfortable. It just didn't. It always kind of, you know. And once again, you would never know how. You couldn't release it, right? Couldn't release it. It was stuck on your back. Huge snag hazard. And how do you know how much air you have unless you had an extra pressure gauge or it didn't, to me, it didn't make sense the way I was semi-taught to use it. I finally figured out that get rid of that and just sling it, shove it on your armpit, call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
That to me made way more sense. You could hand it off, but it took me a while. I didn't have the right instructor at the time to teach me that part of it. So you live and learn. And that's the other part. You might find an instructor who might not really realize how certain things are done.
Right.
Strictly recreational diver or instructor that has never ever worn a set of doubles, but will tell you all about them.
Right. Right.
Right? Will tell you exactly how to put them on, how to set up your gear, and exactly what size you need. Not even realizing that there are different size, different size tanks, for, whether it's Worthington or Faber, the whole thing. And what the buoyancy characteristics, a lot of people don't go into those details. Of course, Todd and I, we debated those details for years. And that was, we always did that. The other one was when I went, I'll tell you two more quick stories because it's pretty relevant to dive sites. Todd and I were on a dive up in Gloucester, Pebble Beach. It was rough. Remember how rough that was?
We had talked about this story earlier today. That's why I'm already laughing.
No, it was really rough, but Todd and I, we got in right before it turned rough, basically, and we were already in the water for about an hour, and then the big rollers were coming in. And if anybody's ever been to Pebble, that the entry and exit's not the easiest when it's rough. There. So about an hour into it, I see an old student that I certified probably had to be 2 years beforehand. And he's walking down with what was he wearing, a shorty?
He was wearing a 3 mil shorty Rockport. Right. In Rockport, I don't care what time of the year it is.
Yeah, it don't matter.
So he had a 3 mil shorty on. I'm not sure if he was wearing boots or full foot fin. He was wearing booties.
Yeah.
He was wearing booties. Yeah. But he had a 3 mil shorty on, Brian.
So we come out of the water. We're coming out of the water, and I recognize him. And I know that he has not been diving in those many years. Yeah, I just knew it. And I said to him, "You realize you're going to be really cold, like really cold." Now I'm good with it. I'm good.
Now keep in mind, Greg and I are in dry suits.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the water was like 38 degrees. On the bottom was 38 degrees.
Yeah, but at 40 feet.
That was a chilly dive. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not even talking any serious depth. You get past 10 feet, and it gets cold.
It gets really cold. Absolutely. I don't think he was in the water for more than 3 minutes. We sat on the beach, geared up, ready to go get him. I don't know if you remember that, Todd.
Yeah.
You're like, this is not going to end well for this guy.
We literally said, we're going to stay here for a few minutes just to see. Yeah.
But it reminds me that when I went to Florida and dove I was already an instructor. And I was with my wife, who was an open water, diver. I hired a dive master who knew the area.
Yep.
He took me to all different sites all over. I forgot really where we went, to Devil's Den and Blue Grotto and a couple other places. But he knew the area. He knew the water temperature. He knew the place to walk in. It's like Jamestown Bull Point on a rough day and seeing a brand new diver barely walk down that little hill.
Yep. Thinking
that this is the perfect site. It looks great. And you got the crashing water, coming over. There's a bunch of things besides dive site selection, gear selection, and use of gear, and everything else. Why having somebody who either is well versed in it or an instructor help you out.
Yeah, definitely. So really, all good things, all relevant stories. Spent most of the time picking on ourselves, which was cool. But bottom line is anytime you're trying something new, whether it be picking out a piece of gear or Greg going to a different dive site, different area, um, consulting a professional in the area is always the best idea. If you're new to the area, you might run into different problems at the dive site. So if a new diver was in Gloucester and they wanted to dive Cathedral Rock, okay, there's just all kinds of things that could happen at that dive site if you don't dive at the right time. And a new diver wouldn't know that, but an experienced diver, whether it be a dive master, a shop, an instructor, or just an experienced diver that dives that area all the time, would be able to help you to have an enjoyable dive, an enjoyable experience. So we fast forward and go to gear selection, whether it be a mask, fins, or you're trying out a new configuration. You're going from a BC and a tank to side mount, or you're going into doubles, or whatever, you're going to a back plate. Everything needs, I should say, you don't need to, but that learning curve. So when I went into doubles, instead of it taking me 2 months to trim myself out and get everything set up the way it was supposed to be set up, I could have probably had it set up in a week to 2 weeks.
I remember when you got your first set of doubles, and I remember how many you were in the water every single day.
Yep.
Every day. It was unbelievable.
Yep.
Well, then there's that dive that I did with you, doing my intro to tech.
We've all had those.
We're in Jamestown, and I'm swimming. I am arched as hard as I can be arched, and I'm head up like this. And Todd's like, "No, your weight's all wrong. Your weight's all wrong. We got to bring weight up because you need to trim up." I'm like, "I can't lay flat. My head's gonna be in the dirt." And he's like, "No." So we're doing this with hand signals. So finally, we're like, "The heck with it." We go up. So we get to the surface, and he's like, "Look, you got to lay flat." I'm like, "Yes, I've got too much weight up top. My head's in the dirt." He's like, "No, you're swimming this way." I'm like, "I know I'm swimming this way. It's to keep me so I don't have my head in the dirt." And he's like, "No, your head's not in the dirt." I'm like, "Oh my God." So we go back down, and he goes, "All right, just lay flat. Don't do nothing." So what happens? As soon as I stop fighting for my position, my head was in the dirt, and I was dragging along in the current. And I held that position for at least 30 seconds. I'm like, "Nope, I am not moving. I'm just going to stay this way." And finally, I feel him tap me. I pull my head out of the dirt, shaking, muck everywhere. And I look at him like, So we went back up and we moved some weights around. We actually had to take the tanks and slide them down. They were up a little too high. We had to make changes. It's a funny story, but it proves your point. The fact that we were together, we were doing that intro to tech, that would have taken me forever to figure out how to fix that. Once you realized where we were at, we went back on shore, made a bunch of adjustments, went back out, and my trim's right where it needs to be.
Yeah.
But and that's where having that instruction helps.
Absolutely. It's as simple. It's as simple as I have my reels up on top of here, as hanging up. It's as simple as laying line. We look at it and go, no big deal. But now all of a sudden you add in a little buoyancy issue. Maybe your fingers aren't working so good. Maybe you can't figure out how to hold the reel the proper way so it doesn't unspool. You know what I mean? It's just those little tiny tips and tricks that somebody who has gone through some training on it, it's just so invaluable. you're right. The learning curve can be this big to this big.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the biggest benefit
Yep.
you're going to find, especially when it comes to setting up gear.
Oh,
When it comes to purchasing gear, you want to consult a professional. A mask. Not everyone knows that you're supposed to be able to hold a mask up and not have to touch it. Not everyone knows that. So they're all buying masks, and then they're leaking and they're freaking out because they're leaking and they can't figure out why.
how many people buy masks that are up here
Yep.
when their temples are here, right? And so, in theory, right, you should have them, it should be here. So that's in the center, but they buy a mask that sits up on top. And now what? They have a hood that comes down, and now they're trying to figure out why is it leaking. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
I got the biggest ones I could get. Well, for your head, hood size, the whole thing,
Right.
might not be the right thing.
So the moral to the story, ladies and gentlemen, anytime you're trying something new, it's always best to at least talk to a professional, whether it's a dive instructor, a dive master, or in most cases, a shop. Because most people that work in a dive shop are knowledgeable in dive gear. So that's all I got.
Yep. It just, in addition to that, most instructors, if you walk into a shop and there happens to be an instructor there, and you're like, look, I'm looking for a piece of gear. I just need to know, is there something I need to know about it? Most guys will help you out.
Yep.
Even if they're not making any profit off you, they'll give you the information you need, like such as how to fit a mask. Okay, maybe you're not going to buy one at this shop. Maybe you're from out of town, whatever. But asking those professionals, in most cases, the pros will help you.
Yeah.
Even though, saying you need to consult a professional isn't necessarily saying that you got to go and spend a lot of money to get the information you're looking
Right.
for.
Absolutely.
A lot of especially the decent guys out there, the ones where you really want to be taking lessons from, in most cases, they're going to help you out even if they're not getting paid.
Right. I mean, the community is small enough and friendly enough that everyone does tend to help the other person out.
It's not
I don't think anybody becomes an instructor or a dive master because they don't want to help somebody.
Exactly.
I don't think it happens that way.
It's not like the auto industry where you got to pay for every little thing.
Well, that's different. But I also think that's right. I also think that a lot of times people buy things based on an advertisement because they really do such a great job advertising, and it looks so cool and it's so slick and shiny. It must really be the best. I must buy that. Well, that's not always the case.
Yep.
It's just,
once again, how many useless items do I have that I bought simply because of that and I don't use anymore?
what's the most useless item you have that you thought was the appropriate thing, but you didn't know? What do you think it was?
Please tell me it's not the air hydrator.
The what?
Oh.
What?
Oh, I remember that. Oh my God.
You'd wet the thing and stick it in the tube, and the air would come through, and it would moisten the air before you could breathe it.
I've never even heard of that one.
Yeah.
But I guess the most useless thing that I have was one of those retractor things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
See, I had that for my compass.
How about the air horn?
No, I never had one of those.
The quacker? You ever have the quacker one?
No.
Seen them.
Oh, seen them.
Sounded like a duck underwater.
Yep.
Yep. How about you,
Me or who?
Greg?
I've had so many useless things. I'm just looking around here. I don't know.
How about Brian? How about you?
In some cases, it was my dive buddy, but but no, the worst thing was that hydrator. I didn't know it existed. One of the students always online, buying stuff online, and then would come into the shop. All right, I'm not sure how to use this, or was this a good buy? It's like, why didn't you ask us first? But whatever. He had the money to spare, so, and he bought this hydrator thing, and so
Yeah.
it almost looked like the inside of like a highlighter. You know, you take a highlighter apart, the sponge that holds the ink. It looked a lot like that, and then it was a cylinder that came right off the first stage, and then your hose would attach to that.
Yeah.
But it's the flimsiest piece of tin, like you could crush it by squeezing it.
It had a piece of metal. It was a bunch of fins that
Yeah.
created vapor, basically. And
Yep.
they moved those. If you remember in the olden days, your regulator, if you ever looked inside, you'd see a metal fin in there. And the idea was it was supposed to collect your when you exhaled, it was supposed to collect it and then
Condensate.
back in, and it made it so that the air wasn't dry that you were breathing. That's
Yeah.
Or
My rebreather doesn't have that problem.
it's wet all the time.
No, but I got my electronics back. So I finally got those back. I'm waiting for the O2 cells to come in, and my baby's getting wet again.
My useless thing were the fins that were like 3 sizes too small that I had to have because that's what I was told that fit me.
Really?
Brand new pair of fins, wore them for a year, didn't realize that they were completely useless. Yeah.
Anyway,
Wow.
gentlemen, I thought it was a topic that needed to be addressed.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've seen several different posts on, well, how do you do this, and everyone on the internet, as we know, is an expert, especially on Facebook. So I mean, this guy was getting all kinds of answers, and then we actually had one dive mount or side mount instructor trying to give him some advice, and he didn't want to hear it. So, but we'll leave that where that is. So that's the reason that we wanted to address the subject of when to consult or seek out the advice of a dive professional. Guys, you got anything to add?
That's
All
it.
right. Greg, Brian, once again, thanks a lot for joining me tonight. And next week we'll come up with something new.
Yeah. Very good.
Good.
See ya.
Thanks.